30th, and this is Geeknights. Tonight, we whine about wine.
Let's do this.
Now, normally, this is where I say, we had a crazy weekend, we were out and blah, 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 we're exhausted. But I got to say, for the first time in a while, we didn't really go anywhere. We didn't really do a lot, and I'm totally well-rested and ready to go.
Could that be because of our extra hour of awesome?
Man, that extra hour this year was so good. I mean, last year I didn't even notice. I totally forgot I got an extra hour. Today, well, and yesterday and the day before, that extra hour just seemed to pervade my entire life. And as a result, I'm totally well-rested, ready to go, and yet I got a lot done over the weekend.
Not only was I well-rested, not only did I get a lot done, but I didn't go to work today.
Now, why, pray tell, did you not, Scott, go to work today?
Well, because about 4 in the morning I had some stomach pains. And there's no way I'm going to work with stomach pains because, A, if I don't make it to work, that's the worst thing ever.
No, because
and
then...
B,
no. All right, go on, because I
B,
submit...
if I do make it to work, the toilet there is the worst thing ever.
I submit that attempting to go to work with stomach problems, not making it, and going home is not the worst thing in the world because it's a private shame. No one sees it. No one knows.
I don't mean it's the worst thing in the world, literally, but it's something I'd like to avoid.
Because the worst thing is
Plus,
the world...
I really don't want to poop all over my nice new car.
See, the worst thing in the world would be if you're going to meet the President of the United States and the Premier of China and your future girlfriend, and then it happens suddenly and violently, and then Hitler is reanimated...
From every orifice.
And shoots you.
And no... It's from violently from every orifice at the worst possible moment, and then you are the resurrection of Hitler, and you get shot.
You find out that they're the resurrection of Hitler, then you get shot.
By the Bionic Commando.
Yeah, Captain Lad Spencer.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
For all Super Joe's awesome, he spends that whole game in a POW camp.
But anyway, for all my not going to work, I didn't tell anyone at my work that I wasn't coming to work today. I didn't tell my boss. Usually I send him an email like, hey, I'm not coming to work today. Because, I work in an office in the middle of nowhere, all alone. I didn't say anything to anyone. I wasn't contacted at all today. No one noticed that I was gone. I did nothing. I was at my house, and that was that. Crazy. Out of control.
So anyway, as most of you from last week know, we got our brand new super fancy dual chain compressor last Thursday. And bit by bit, I'm learning how to use it because it has a lot more functionality and a lot more fine-tuning than the previous compressor we had.
Yeah, it looks like it has one extra knobbly, and the other compressor did.
It also has more buttons.
It also has a lot more buttons, and it has 2 compressors, not 1.
So we have a total now of 3 compressors.
One without a power cable.
Which we'll get eventually.
Eventually, someday.
So I guess my heads up now is that for the next week at least, I'm going to be doing the show as normal, listening to the show on my way to work, and learning how to use this compressor better because the compressor is so much more powerful. I think at this point I can make the show sound pretty much perfect, as in better than your average radio station.
You have no idea how annoying this is for me because I'll be sitting in my room minding my own business, and all I hear from Rim is he's basically screaming throughout the house, testing, moving knobbly.
I often yell. The 2 phrases I
knobbly.
yell the most are Jack Thompson and Power Book.
Yeah, he's just yelling around the house, and he's just sitting there moving knobs and yelling. Move knobs, yell. It really sucks to sit in a house trying to do something while someone else is, moving knobs and yelling, and I'm trying to read a book or play a video game.
At least when I do my I mean, that's not most of my testing. Most of my testing, I'm playing Savatage White Witch at crazy volumes while fiddling with the compressor in real time and listening to it on headphones.
Why don't you keep the headphones on? And
I have the headphones on anyway.
Put a box over your head so I don't hear you yelling.
You can deal with my yelling.
Whatever.
Old yeller.
That's what you are.
All right, yeah. So we're back to normal, and hopefully the show is going to sound tiny bits better day by day. So once again, I've noticed a funny trend that about half the people who've mentioned the compressor said that you couldn't hear a difference, and the other half said that the difference was noticeable and important. And I noticed a distinct age correlation between the two. Granted, my sample size is very small. So all I ask is that if you notice that a particular episode of Geeknights sounds particularly better or particularly worse, or you hear anything particularly annoying in the next week, let me know. Otherwise, I think I can handle the optimization of this thing on my own at this point.
Why don't we try to make like a 128 MP3 one day just to have an extra high quality episode or something.
Ah.
Then people could really see if there's a difference.
True, because a lot of the difference will be lost in the MP3-ness, though not as much since we use a higher bitrate than most podcasts.
Yeah, we do. Anyway.
So you got some news being
I got some
Monday,
news.
Science and Tech
So
Day.
Seagate, who you might remember bought Maxtor, creating the largest hard drive manufacturer in the universe.
Also unifying the House of Rim and Scott, because I have been a lifelong Maxtor user.
And I've been a lifelong Seagate user.
And with their powers combined, I don't know.
It's funny, though, how, I was the Seagate user and you're the Maxtor user. And Maxtor is now like the cheap value line. And Seagate is the real deal. Anyway.
I think that has more to do with the names and the target markets, because both companies brought a lot of good technology to the table. And
Well, I think what they found out was what Seagate found out when they bought Maxtor is the people who buy Maxtor drives really don't intersect with the people who buy Seagate drives at all. And that's why it was such a profitable venture. They got so many new customers.
Yep. Plus, they got Maxtor's crazy tech in addition to their own crazy tech, because they both had innovated in the hard drive market.
Yeah, but Seagate and Hitachi really do most of the hard drive innovating. Anyway.
IBM used to.
Yeah, they used to. Not anymore. So, Seagate has innovated yet again in hard drive technology.
Oh, really?
They have a new, technology called Drive Trust. And what this does is the hard drive is going to encrypt itself. Even right now, if I wanted to, I could set up a loopback device or something else in order to encrypt all the data on my hard drive, which means that no one can get the data off my hard drive without a key or a password or maybe a physical key or something like that. So if you took my computer and ran away, you couldn't get any of my personal information off the disk. Or if I was arrested or the FBI took my computers and they tried to figure out if I had illegal stuff on there, they couldn't find anything because it's encrypted.
Now, there are a lot of questions regarding this sort of thing, and a lot of pros and cons regardless of the answers.
Yeah, I mean, right now there aren't too many details other than they're going to put it in hard drives. We don't know if they're going to put it in every hard drive or just some hard drives. It's proprietary, but if other hard drive manufacturers want to use it, I guess they're going to sell it to them, the technology.
Yeah, they'll probably license it.
Yeah. And you're going to have to enter the password on the computer or something like that. It doesn't say whether that's a BIOS level thing, or just after the BIOS thing, or an OS thing.
Well, I'll imagine that if this comes to pass, then it won't be long before there are special motherboard things where you can have a chip on the motherboard that handles all this for you, and you just wherever the chip goes, the hard drives will be encrypted.
I really think the best way to go about this is to have some sort of physical, like a USB key.
I was just about to say that, actually. A little dongle.
But it doesn't look like that's what it's going to be.
Not yet, anyway.
It also doesn't say the strength of the encryption. If this encryption is weak, then what's the point, really?
Well, it depends. I mean, weak is a relative term.
Yeah.
I mean, if you use, like, standard kinds of encryption, if a super government entity really wants to get your data, they can get it in a reasonable amount of time in a lot of cases. The thing is, if encryption is ubiquitous, if everything is encrypted and people are always encrypting stuff, it doesn't matter that a supercomputer can break one guy's encryption, because it now greatly increases the barrier to snooping on anyone.
Yeah. Also, even 128-bit encryption, which is pretty low considering lots of people out there are using like 4096 Diffie-Hellman crazy batshit stuff with GPG. 128-bit takes years and years and years and years and years. There's really not a computer that can solve it in a reasonable amount of time.
Now, more importantly, this kind of hardware encryption, one important drawback is that let's say something happens and the hard drive is compromised in some way, physically. You break it or something fails in it, or the little encryption thing dies. It's going to be a lot harder, if not impossible.
It's going to be impossible, pretty much. They said it's going to be impossible.
To get the data off.
A data recovery company will basically not be able to recover your data if something happens.
Yeah, obviously, if something happens to the encryption mechanism.
Yeah.
Because if the actual key is still intact on the hardware, then the company can almost always get the data off.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, you have to remember that anytime you encrypt something, not just in this specific instance, but in general, you're also increasing the chance that you will lose that data forever because it makes it much harder to recover that data if something bad happens.
Yeah, I mean, if you set a password for the drive and you forget the password, you're pretty much screwed. There's going to be no way to recover that password at all. You're going to have to throw the hard drive out or return it to Seagate or something.
I ran into that a couple
data,
times.
you're certainly not going to get back.
At IBM, we had these special chips in the motherboards of a lot of systems that were security things, and you could implement high security, which meant that if anything fishy happened, the computer was rendered permanently inoperable, and the motherboard had to be replaced.
Wow.
That was for high security things. It wasn't used often, but every now and then, I'd try to install Linux on some box to stick out somewhere in the factory, and I'd run into that, and the only option was to ship the motherboard back to the factory and get a new motherboard.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me just read. I want to read 3 short things from the article here. It says, even data recovery specialists would not be able to help if the assigned password somehow gets lost, said Scott Shimamura, a senior product manager at Seagate. That's the trade-off. Anytime you introduce backdoors or holes to circumvent the security, then you've created vulnerability, he said. Seagate said it has already implemented the technology into one of its drives for laptops and another for digital video recorders. So that's not so bad. I mean, for regular computers, that's sort of like, all right, what do I really need it for? I can do it in a different way that is guaranteed to work on my computer and that, I'm responsible for. But for a digital video recorder or a digital camera or something like that, this is actually pretty good because, you're switching drives in and out of these things all the time. Maybe I want to take some pictures that are pretty hot and I don't want anyone to look at them. So I password protect my little tiny hard drive that I use in my video camera. Then I take that hard drive out and, my RIM wants to use the camera. He pops his hard drive in there, which has a different password. So you can keep your videos secret from other people that's not dependent on the camera, but the drive itself.
But at the same time, this can be used by companies that want to make DVRs to make it more difficult to get at your data when they apply DRM. Yeah. It also, now a lot of people think, if I ever get busted by the MPAA or the government for whatever shady things I'm doing or whatever weird illegal pornography I may have, I'll just have it encrypted. No one can get me. Even if the government can't get the data, if they get a hold of the hard drive and you refuse to give up the key, there are a lot of laws and methods where the government can punish you, at least in the United States, for not furnishing the key so they can access your data.
Yeah, there's sort of crazy legal stuff about
However,
that. That's how the EFF got started, was dealing with that issue.
However, one nice thing is that in many cases, though it varies widely depending on what's going on and the severity of your crime and all sorts of things, it might be better off if you did something bad not giving up the key anyway, because if you've committed a bad enough crime, the penalty for not giving up the key is probably less, even at maximum, than the penalty for whatever you're charged with.
Yes, but I guess it's good then for people who want to do illegal things.
Well,
that,
if you want to do,
Seagate isn't going to allow any back doors into the encryption. So,
the thing is, I wish I had a way to verify that Seagate really wasn't putting back doors in the encryption.
I know, but it seems like I can trust them. There hasn't been a reason to distrust Seagate yet. They've done pretty good stuff. All their drives are awesome, so hey.
So anyway, in science news, straight up science news for a change. Now, there has been a lot of controversy, though when I say controversy, I mean in the same way that there's quote-unquote controversy concerning the theory of evolution. There's been a big thing for a long time now about how vaccines that contain mercury somehow cause autism in children, which I'll say right now is absolutely not true. There have been mountains of studies, and there's crazy amounts of data saying that this is completely not true in any way, shape, or form, and there's not only not any chance of causation, but there isn't even a correlation.
As in there are people who didn't get vaccines and have autism?
No, as in there's no statistical link whatsoever, and the people who posit this are total nutbags.
So
no credible scientists.
So they have no evidence whatsoever.
Now, basically what happened was, in recent years, autism has been on the rise, which is a very misleading thing to say, though it is technically correct. Autism has been reported more frequently in recent years. However, it wasn't until recently that autism was better defined and easier to diagnose and more precise to diagnose. So we don't know if autism is actually more prevalent or if we've just figured out better how to differentiate between someone who's mentally retarded and someone who is spectrum autistic or spectrum Asperger's, Asparagusers.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, besides, the thing is,
So basically, we don't know anything. We know relatively little about a lot of this stuff, and some people think that they know, and they're saying something as if it's true without any evidence whatsoever.
yeah. Well, plus, I mean, like 50 years ago, someone who was autistic would probably not be recognized as autistic because it didn't matter. The end result was that the child had severe difficulty, and they generally treated them like any other developmentally challenged child. And now that there's a lot of federal funding and science has improved, we're able to diagnose it more. And a lot of whack jobs are saying that, therefore, because we're seeing more autism, something must be causing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we honestly, as humans, as scientists, still don't know exactly what causes autism spectrum disorder. In fact, we barely understand how it happens or what effects it has or how to treat it or anything. It's this huge, horrible mystery.
Is anyone studying the DNA to see
Yes.
if the people have different genes or something?
Yes, and there are some links, but those links are not universal.
Oh, wow.
There are genes that show a predisposition toward autism and things like that, and men are by far more likely to be autistic than women.
Mm-hmm. So they should start looking in that little Y guy there. I bet you you'll find something.
Yeah, probably more complicated than that.
Probably, but it still sounds like a right idea to me.
Yeah. So the news here is that because the autism has been coming up more and more, supposedly, people have been looking for a scapegoat, especially the parents of children who are autistic. They want someone to blame, and people preying on this have decided that the cause of autism is mercury in the preservatives for vaccines. Because there's
does these people really have it against vaccines?
Yes.
Are they like those Christian whatever they are?
Many of them are, but not all of them.
Uh-huh.
It all comes down, the one that gets the most press is the substance called thimerosal, which contains mercury and is used not only in many vaccines, especially in the third world, but in all sorts of other medicines. It's actually fairly common, especially outside of the United States. It's been in vaccines for a long time.
So why is it more common outside the United States?
Because it's been phased out for newer, better things.
Uh-huh.
In the United States, it's not used in that many vaccines anymore. Though, for any of you who got a flu shot, it is in most flu vaccines. And I know for a fact that it was in the flu vaccine I received as a critical care worker. In fact, I have a funny anecdote here where I was sitting ready to get my flu vaccine from my work. And I'm sitting there and I asked the guy, hey, is there any thimerosal in this vaccine? And he stops and he looks at me and he very cautiously says something like, why do you ask? Are you one of those people who believes that thimerosal causes disorders such as autism? And I looked at him with a straight face and laughed and said, no, I'm not one of those nut jobs. I was just curious. And he expressed to me that I was probably the first person who was not a scientist or doctor he had ever met who said the word thimerosal and was not a crazy nut job.
So did you ask him if he had actually encountered crazy nut jobs and what they were like?
We had a little small talk, and he said that he's had a lot of people refuse the vaccine because they were afraid that, like guys would refuse the vaccine because they're afraid that it would give their yet-to-be-born children autism.
I have a feeling that those people, while they might believe that, are actually subconsciously coming up with an excuse because they don't want to get a shot.
All right, that's actually not a bad posit there.
Yeah.
So anyway, the news here, because I've gotten kind of off topic, is that this group of whack jobs for a long time has been seeking to force the FDA to put restrictions on or ban the use of thimerosal. And finally, it has been decided, and the decision is now public. The FDA rejected it entirely and basically called them nut jobs, saying that their claim has absolutely no merit and that all of the evidence points to the contrary. Now,
awesome.
Here's where it gets interesting. One, I'm glad the system works. Hooray, FDA.
Sometimes.
Dr. Mark Greer, one of the people on the side of the whack job, says, quote, we're not accepting that answer.
What? What are you going to do?
I don't know, but the whack jobs don't accept it, and they still say, despite the fact that every scientist in the world with any shred of credibility says that thimerosal is not dangerous and doesn't cause autism, I don't know what to say. These people are just crazy.
God damn it. Freaking apple juice causes AIDS, and I know it. You got to ban apple juice, man. No more. Well, we're not going to because apple juice doesn't cause AIDS. Apple juice causes AIDS. What the
So I bring it up. I saw this in the news last week, and I made it my news mostly just because this whole Scott knows there are some hot buttons with me. There are certain topics that were the people involved are just so stupid. And they're so unwilling to listen to logic, reason, or evidence that I just, my head catches on fire. Even if the topic comes up. If Scott walks into my room, I'm trying to go to sleep, and he's like, thimerosal. I'll lay there and seethe for another hour.
See.
Things of the day.
I got a pretty hot thing of the day.
I got an okay thing of the day.
How okay is your thing of the day?
Well, it involves politics and pornography.
All right, anyway, my thing today is much better than that.
Yeah, it involves a sport that probably hardly anyone listening cares about.
It's not about the sport.
Yeah, we're about even, I think.
Anyway, Michael Schumacher is probably, statistically speaking, the greatest motorsport racer to ever have lived. And he still lives. He just retired a week ago or so. And he's the second highest paid athlete in the entire world as of right now.
Beaten only by what, Tiger Woods?
Tiger Woods is the only one who makes more money than Michael Schumacher. In fact, they have a lot in common because they're both individual athletes and not team guys and whatever. So, being retired and living in Switzerland, even though he's German, Michael Schumacher, one of his sponsors is Shell gasoline. And so on his day off, he went to the Shell station, and they did some sort of promotional event there. And what they did is they put hidden cameras all over the gas station, and Michael Schumacher did a whole bunch of funny things, and they made, I guess these are commercials. I don't know if they're actually going to use them for commercials, but they made a bunch of funny little videos. And the first one, there's a guy pulls into the gas station, and Michael Schumacher puts out the little lollipop stick that says, stop, just like in the pit stops in the real races. And the whole pit crew jumps out and soups up this guy's car.
Granted, while it's definitely filmed to look like one of those, sudden out of the blue catch a guy by surprise thing, I wouldn't be surprised if that was totally staged.
Yeah, that one might have been totally staged, but it really kind of seems like the way I read the article is that they spent all day at this Shell station. So
just doing weird stuff.
Yeah, and then they had hidden cameras everywhere, so they eventually caught a good one.
Probably my favorite one is where they've just got that little display, and he's just standing in the middle of it in the store, like, "Hey, I'm Michael Schumacher."
In the second video, they just had this big red piece of cardboard, and he stands there pretending to be a statue of himself. And people are looking at him and poking him, and he's just standing there. He winks at a guy once,
and the guy just goes like, "Oh my God, it's really him."
Yeah.
So you gotta understand that while in America, I'll bet most of you have no idea who Michael Schumacher is or care about him at all. But in other countries, especially in Switzerland where he is right now, he's like Michael Jackson. Everyone who sees him goes, "That's Michael Schumacher. Holy crap."
Yeah, imagine if you went into a shoe store and Tiger Woods there was a big piece of cardboard, and he was standing there like a statue. And you just walked in, you look at him, and he doesn't move. That's exactly what this is, only it's a guy you might not know.
That's what this is.
Tiger Woods might be the best golfer ever, and this guy's the best car driver ever. And the third one is actually also kind of funny because there's a guy who comes up to get gas, and he has the loyalty card for Shell gasoline. And the guy, points out that if he has the loyalty card, he can get his picture taken with Michael Schumacher. So he goes inside to the gas station, and Michael Schumacher just comes right up behind him. He's like, "Hey, what you doing?" The guy's like, "Holy crap!"
The guy seems to lose it, like he doesn't know what to do. He's that kind of celebrity deer in headlights thing.
Yeah, and he gets his picture taken with him, and shakes hands, and he goes on his way. But the funniest part of that is that you can see just how small Michael Schumacher is.
Tiny little dude.
Race guys who drive in F1, they're really fit because they have to, withstand all those G-forces and have quick reaction times and all that. But they're small. I mean, if you're a big guy, you're going to have trouble fitting into a tiny, tiny car. And you're going to add weight to the car that's unnecessary.
See, the first time I realized they were little, because I just never thought about it, is when I finally watched some more F1 races, and I started noticing that when they bring out the Magnum of champagne to spray around at the end, it looks real big.
It is pretty big.
But it looks a lot bigger than that thing should look.
Yeah, especially because you only see these race car drivers outside of their cars when they're standing on the podium or they're at the press conference,
and
which is when they're standing next to each other, and they're all small.
It's like if you saw a movie about halflings, and the only people in it were halflings, you probably wouldn't know they were halflings.
Probably not.
No, unless you saw their
they
feet.
were squat. And wider than they are tall, but
yeah, but halflings.
As long
like
as
that.
the proportions were correct, you wouldn't know.
Kind of like hobbits.
Kind of like hobbits. So yeah, this is pretty awesome. These videos right here.
All right, so like I said, politics and pornography. So some Republican candidate, George Allen, he's the one. There's been this whole thing in the political climate and the midterm elections in the U.S. because this is in the United States. I know we have a lot of foreign listeners, so I don't want to just act like U.S. politics is all that matters, because it totally isn't. But we're having our midterm elections very soon, which
a week from tomorrow.
Most people in America don't bother with, because you're not electing a president or anything most people care about. You're just electing various members of our 2 houses of Congress and a bunch of local stuff. So this year, it's really important because, among other things, it looks like the Republicans might lose control of our House of Representatives, which has a lot of ramifications for the years to come.
Big ones.
Now, the interesting thing is that the Republicans this year have, by and large, been running extremely vicious negative campaigns against the Democrats, accusing them of being pedophiles and evil, Nazis, on the side of Al-Qaeda, all sorts of stuff. It's crazy. It's also kind of hilarious to people like us who don't really care about these people.
Yeah.
So this George Allen, this Republican, ran an ad with excerpts from his opponent's pornography. You see, his opponent had written some pornographic literature in his day.
Wasn't there a guy that was being investigated a while ago that wrote a porn? What was his name?
Scooter Libby, I believe.
Yeah, that was the guy. He freaking wrote a porno book.
So it turns out that a lot of politicians have written pornography.
Really? Maybe I should write some porn and then run for office.
So on Slate here, they've got this fun little exercise where they list a whole bunch of politicians. And
How many?
A through M.
Holy shit.
Let's see. We got Barbara Boxer, who I'm a fan of, William Buckley, Jimmy Carter.
They've all written porn?
Jimmy Carter, Newt Gingrich, Joseph Nye, Kenneth Starr.
they all wrote porn?
Winston Churchill.
What?
So, and then it lists for a number of pornographic excerpts. I'm going to flip through.
Oh, so they didn't write actual porno books?
Some of them did.
Some of them did, but they might have just written a paragraph or two that could be skewed as pornographic or...
Some of them are straight up pornographic. Some of them just happen to have vicious or vivid pornography in them. They're varying levels of pornography.
All right. Because I was under the impression that all these people wrote porno books to be sold in porno stores, which is not the case.
All right, here's a quote from the first one here. Suddenly, the pouting sex kitten gave way to Diana the Huntress. She rolled onto him, and somehow was sitting athwart his chest, her knees pinning his shoulders. Tell me, or I'll make you do terrible things, she hissed.
All right, who wrote that?
I didn't even read the results part. But the exercise here is that you have to match each politician with their pornographic excerpts.
Okay.
It's fun to try.
Lol.
So anyway, today being science, tech, computers, and considering Scott had some very important success with wine, we would like to talk about wine.
Not the kind you drink.
No.
Even though the icon for the wine we're talking about is the kind you drink.
Also, not the thing that people who are mad about this thimerosal rejection would do after they lost.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, I wanted to say the word rejection twice. I've been wanting to do that for a while now.
Dejection is much better.
All right, so we thought we'd talk about it because a lot of people really don't know what it is. A lot of people who use Linux don't realize it exists and the fact that it can make their lives a lot easier.
Or harder.
And also, it is in the recent year gotten incredibly better.
Incredibly better.
Like 2 years ago, wine was very different and very less useful than it is today.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start at the beginning. Recently, Linux has been getting a big push, mostly because of Ubuntu and Edgy and such. Yeah, it's becoming real popular. And, I've been encouraging people to just try it out because you can pop the live CD in and just try it out. With no risk to your computer, no money. It costs you one CD and a few minutes of your time.
In fact, if you really want, you can get a free CD from Ubuntu.
Yeah, they'll send you. I have official CDs. I'll mail you one. I don't have too many, though, so I can't get too many requests.
Yeah, I mean, I even gave one of my coworkers an Ubuntu CD, and he ended up installing it on some old computer he has, and he loves it, and he couldn't believe how far Linux has come from the last time he tried it.
Yeah, but one hang-up a lot of people have from totally switching to Ubuntu or Linux in general is that you can't run your Windows applications. I mean, sure, let's say you used Microsoft Office in Windows. Well, you don't really need Microsoft Office in Linux because you have OpenOffice, so big deal.
But let's say you need Visio.
Well, yeah, Visio's a perfect example, even though there's a program called Dia that does almost the same thing.
Yeah, but if you use Visio at your work, you can't use anything else because your files won't work with the people who have Visio.
Yeah. Or let's say you have some fun games like Steam that you really want to play. Well, one solution is to dual boot, where you reboot your computer to Windows, run your Windows applications, reboot your computer to Linux, use your Linux applications. That's not really a good thing because now you're wasting all this time rebooting. You might as well just use Windows if you really need those applications.
Yeah, I mean, back at RIT, I used Windows instead of Linux as my OS because I played more games than I did anything else on my computer back then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It wasn't until PC gaming slowed down that I was able to go to Linux full time. Like, that was pretty much the hang-up.
Yep, but now PC gaming is starting to pick up again, at least for us.
Well, at least it is on Steam. There's so many games on Steam now. Oh, my God.
Well, consider this. Between DEF CON, Half-Life 2, Counter-Strike Source, The Ship, and the upcoming Natural Selection Source, that's enough to make me buy a badass freaking computer and play games again.
Yeah. All right, so let's say you really like Linux. You want to use it full-time, but you have one or two Windows applications that are Windows-only applications that you really need in order to continue doing business, and they're preventing you from going to Linux, which you might like better or like equally or whatever.
Or you're just cheap and you don't want to pirate Windows.
Or you're cheap and you don't want to pirate Windows. The solution is whine.
Now, whine is actually an acronym, and this is very important. We're not going to go into technical detail, but we're going to try to explain in somewhat layman terms exactly what this does. Because whine stands for whine is not an emulator.
W-I-N-E. Whine is not an emulator.
A lot of people, when they hear about whine, the way people describe it, and I'm guilty of this, say, oh yeah, it's a Windows emulator. So you run it in Linux, and then in that you can run Windows programs. And it's like having a tiny little Windows, which is kind of true, but it's really misleading as to what whine actually does.
Yeah, an emulator really is something that, mimics a computer. Like, it will emulate an actual machine and take machine instructions and carry them out as if it were a different computer.
Yeah, like Plex 86 is an emulator.
Oh, yeah. Box, B-O-C-H-S, is an emulator.
Yes.
You run Box on, like, a PowerPC computer, and it pretty much creates an x86 computer in software.
And then you install an operating system on this fake computer, and well, I could go into detail, but basically, that sounds really inefficient, and that's because it is really inefficient.
It is. Now, what is whine if it's not an emulator? Well, when you have a computer, you have instructions that you tell the processor, the chip, the Pentium chip, the Athlon chip, whatever you got in there, that your freaking assembly language. God, why did I completely lose my mind?
All right,
you have a chip, and you can send instructions to it to tell it to do things. Now, whether you have Windows or whether you have Linux, you have the same chip in there, probably. So it understands the same instructions.
Yeah, if you wrote a program in assembler, it would just run.
Yep. The thing is there are some instructions that you don't send directly to the chip. You send them to the operating system, and the operating system then tells the chip what to do.
Yep. Now, this is called an API, a way to interface with the operating system, which then interfaces with all the hardware.
So let's say you wrote a game for Windows, right? And in that game, when you were writing the software for the game, you had an instruction. You told Windows, draw a line on the screen, right through the middle of the screen, draw a black line, right? And that's part of your game. Well, if you try to tell that to Linux, Linux goes, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah,
I don't know.
because Windows has a way where you say, "I want to have a line drawn blah." You tell Windows, "Draw the line the way you draw lines," it'll do it. So nothing understands that but Windows, because it makes a call to a function that is in Windows. It is a Windows-specific thing. What whine does is it watches for Windows calls like that and turns them into Linux calls.
Yeah, so if you run a program on Linux that's a Windows program, Linux goes, "I don't know what the hell you're asking for most of the time. This doesn't work. Forget it." But if you put it inside of whine, so you say whine space solitaire.exe, whenever solitaire wants to draw a window, it tells whine, and then whine says, "All right, Linux, this is this guy over here. I'm going to translate for you what he's saying."
Now, because you're just translating instructions, and only the instructions that need to be translated, and because whine has been developed over the years to do it in an efficient way, this is vastly better than trying to emulate an entire computer.
Extremely superior.
It also basically allows you to run a Windows program in Linux as though it were in Windows. It doesn't care. It doesn't know. It just opens in a window like any other program. And the calls that need to be sent to a Windows thing get sent to a Windows thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, all of the instructions for what to do when certain instructions come in are in libraries. You know those DLLs you got all over the place?
Those are called dynamically linked libraries.
Yeah, that's where the instructions are all defined and made up and such. But if you want, with whine, they have a default set of open source libraries that you can use, and they work really well.
A lot of these are reverse engineered or generally mimic functionality from Windows, and they've been done very well, but they're not perfect.
They're not perfect all the time, but when they work great.
And seriously, in the last year, they've come a long freaking way.
They've come a long freaking way.
Good
Holy
God.
crap.
I mean, most of my job at IBM involved developing in whine, so I got some stories.
Yeah, but if you have a copy of Windows, you can tell whine to use the actual libraries from Windows instead.
So go into a Windows install or search on Google and find them.
Yeah.
Get the DLLs, put them in whine, and tell whine, "Hey, use these actual Windows files." Now, there are varying levels of legality in terms of this, but essentially, if you own a legitimate copy of Windows, you are generally within your rights to use the DLLs in that way.
And if you do that, whine will work awesomely, but you're going to have to put in the effort to tell whine to use all these DLLs.
Now, we could do a whole show, because I was basically a
Yeah.
whine developer, and Scott has done a bunch of whine stuff recently, and we could tell you exactly what to do. But luckily, for most of you, there are now instructions onto internet that will tell you exactly, type this, then this, then this, then this, and this will work in whine.
The one thing I got to say, though, whenever I point anyone to a how-to, especially a Linux how-to with command line stuff in it, and whine, really, you don't need so much command line stuff these days.
No, it used to need a lot more. Now, it used to be you had to edit this really poorly thought-out text file that didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, now in Ubuntu, you can pretty much do apt-get install whine to install whine. And then you can put a program like sol.exe on your desktop in Ubuntu, which is solitaire, double-click on it, and it'll run, just like if it was Windows.
Yep, you really only have to do anything to whine other than install it if you're trying to run something complicated like Steam.
Or Microsoft Office.
Yes,
or Photoshop.
Or Internet Explorer.
Internet Explorer is not as tricky. Depends which version you want.
It used to be. Good fucking God, it used to be.
It used to be.
Even now, you got to do some tricks usually to make IE work.
It depends. There are some whine-based things out there like Crossover and Sedega. And basically what those are is whine plus, but they're not free. Like, Sedega is a company. They take whine and they add a bunch of stuff to it so that it can play a bunch of games. But, so, do you really need it is the question? I mean,
no, you used to.
Yeah, you used to really need it because it just didn't work without it. Nowadays, I just got Half-Life 2 to work in plain old free whine without any Windows DLLs today, and it works.
Now, consider this. It was about 7 months ago that I tried to do the same with an older version of whine, and it just wouldn't work at all. It was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, there was the newest version of whine, which I'm not even using. I'm using 2 versions ago. Just added dual monitor support. Just.
Yeah.
It's a behind. Whine is always about a year behind the newest Windows. And when Vista comes out, Vista stuff probably won't work in Wine for about a year.
Yeah, of course, I mean, the same thing happened with Windows 2000 and XP, but luckily, well, I guess unluckily, Wine wasn't that good back then, so it didn't matter.
Yeah. Now, Wine, while I wouldn't depend heavily on Wine for a whole mess of applications.
Yeah, at least not unless you have a competent Wine guy who can sit there and help you.
Yeah. If you've got a lot of Windows applications and you're not, trying to replace them with Linux alternatives or open source alternatives, you probably should just be using Windows. But if you got one or two Windows applications, Wine is a very reasonable and good choice of how to get those things working without having Windows.
Yeah, and we're not kidding. You don't need to know much, especially in Ubuntu, to make it work.
Yeah, you basically just type wine space the name of the program that you're trying to run .exe and you press enter.
Yep, it'll probably just work without you doing anything.
Yeah, the general rule with Wine is that a program will either just work or it's going to be a huge pain in the ass and it's not worth it.
Yeah, if you don't get it to work with minimal effort, it's probably not going to work with any amount of effort.
Unless you start writing code for Wine. Because the reason something usually doesn't work is because it's trying to tell Windows to do things that they haven't yet implemented in Wine. So let's say, you had a game that said draw a line, and the guys who develop Wine, who are writing the Wine software, didn't yet, make the draw line function. Then your program's going to do some weird shit.
Either that, or it's when you've got two Windows programs that interact with each other in a not obvious or easy way. Like, now, at IBM, one of my main jobs was to take this terrible piece of shit old application that was written for like Windows 3.1 and Windows 95 and make it work in Linux. And this program requires the Oracle client. So I had to get the Oracle client for Windows because it wasn't really possible to make this program interface easily with the Linux version of Oracle, which works great. I had to get the Windows version of Oracle to work in Wine. Then I had to get this application to work in Wine. Then I had to get them to talk to each other properly.
Not easy.
Good fucking God. I was paid a lot of money to make that work.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sit down and do that for free in my spare time.
Now, there's good news, though, and that is the other rule of Wine, is that if something works in Wine, there's a good chance it'll work better than it does on Windows. I mean, sometimes it's about the same. I mean, my Half-Life 2, now that I got it working, works about the same as it does on Windows. But, for example, what's a good thing that works a whole lot better? Half-Life 1, actually, works a whole lot better in Wine than it does on Windows. It's just because the software is written more efficiently than the giant bloated Windows operating system.
I think it has more to do with just the fact that when you have limited system resources, Linux as a whole has less overhead.
Yeah, and the Wine is a very thin layer, relatively speaking.
Yes.
So even when you put that thin layer on top of the very efficient Linux kernel, it's still more efficient than Windows and all of its blobness.
So I guess if you've been thinking about making the switch to Linux and you only use a few Windows applications, like Scott said, check out Wine. See if you can get your stuff to work, because that's one more step closer to switching. But don't get us wrong. I mean, we're computer professionals. We're not zealots in any direction. Use whatever operating system makes sense for what you do. If you're a Windows developer, run Windows. If you're an animator or a graphic designer and you need all those programs that only run on Macs or Windows, use Macs or Windows.
Yeah, I mean, but Wine is an option. It does exist, and it's getting better every day, and we're just trying to make sure that people understand that it's out there and how it works and what it does, and if it's good for you, maybe it's good for you.
Now, the thing is, I want to see if we can get iTunes to work in Wine.
People have been trying, and there's been mixed results because iTunes is
I know, I'm one of those people.
They think
I've got a broken iTunes on my Gentoo box right now.
The real problem with getting iTunes to work in Wine is that the only use for iTunes is the iPod support, and getting it to work with a device, like a USB peripheral, is kind of tricky.
Actually, usually it's not that tricky at all.
Yeah, really?
It really depends on what's going on. Because in many cases, look in the config file for Wine. I just know this because I had to make this crap old printer print through the serial ports in Wine.
Oh.
You can just say, COM1 will cat out directly and raw to serial port 1. You can do things like that. So serial ports, parallel ports are more tricky because there are different standards of parallel port.
Yeah, well, these are USBs, so I don't know. And especially since the way Linux is handling USB devices lately. They keep changing it up with the UDEV and all that jazz.
Yeah, though theoretically, now I say this with a grain of salt because I've never tried.
I've never tried it either.
But when it comes to parallel ports and serial ports, you can make whine just talk through the serial port raw, or you can send the input and output through a program or anywhere you want. Because whine programs running in whine are running in Linux. They can interact with Linux straight up. You can pipe the output to places. You can send stuff in any way that the program would normally accept.
Mm-hmm.
So physical devices are no different. But USB, I've never actually looked at how whine supports USB, so I can't say. But I'm going to look into that soon because I have an old broken recording bit that I want to work in Linux.
Oh, yeah. Maybe that's a good idea. Give me the recording bit software. I'll try to get it to work tonight.
Yeah, because I never tried to get that to work in whine. I've never tried to make USB work, and
I'll go for it. Give me the CD. I'll do it while you're post-productioning the show.
Yeah.
I'll go for it. We'll see if it goes.
And, of course, thus concludes Season 1 of Geeknights.
Oh, Nois.
It's been a year. Starting tomorrow is Season 2 of Geeknights. We're going to start over with Episode 1.
Holy crap.
I'm kind of excited. We've been doing this for a whole year.
Yeah, of course, we're slightly shit-talking because we had all these plans. We'd have new music. We, change the format a little, kind of rejuvenate the show, but we're only going to do a little bit of that, not so much.
Yeah, well, part of it was that a lot of people really like our music, and our opening song, which we have the blessing of DJ Pretzel for, really seems to define the show. So at least for another year, we're going to keep it around.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good to me. Less work.
Yep, and of course, tomorrow, to inaugurate Season 2, we are going to have for you our very awesome interview with Luke Crane, the creator of Burning Wheel.
Yes, in Season 2, that is one thing you can expect from Geeknights, is that we will have more interviews and Skype action. Now, we're not going to go crazy like other podcasts do, because we know that if you're listening to the show, maybe, if you're a new listener, this might not be true. But for our old listeners, we know the reason you're probably still listening is you like listening to us talk. And I know from listening to a lot of podcasts that when they have interviews every day, you kind of go, all right, I listen to the show because the hosts are awesome and I never get to hear them say anything. Cut back the interviews a little bit, guys. But we are not going to go super crazy on the interviews, but we will have some more to spicing up the show starting tomorrow.
Yep, we'll be bringing in, whenever we need a scientific expert, we'll probably just Skype him right in and get him in right then.
Yep.
Also, we'd like to have a lot more listener feedback on the show. Geekback was going well, but we figure it'd be better if we really only used audio feedback. So if you want to be on the show, you have questions, you want to talk to us, use our audio. We are much more likely to respond to you on the show if you send us audio as opposed to if you send us an email.
Yes, go to frontrowcrew.com, and on the right side of the page, you're going to scroll down, and there's a black rectangle, and it says, send me an audio, and it's got a little pink thing in it if you can't find it.
If nothing else, think of it this way. We get enough email now to where while we read all of it, we by far do not have the time to respond to all of it.
Yeah, it's like a lot of times I see an email, and I go, man, I'm going to reply to that, but then I don't, and it goes down my Gmail, and I forget about it. I don't put a star next to it or anything.
So if you send us an audio, that'll really stand out from the pack.
Yeah, audios are hot and awesome.
Audio. And that was Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for our opening theme.
Be sure to visit our website at www.frontrowcrew.com. If you like our podcasts, you'll love our forums. Make sure you visit them. You can send your email feedback to geeknights@gmail.com. And if you want, you can leave us a voicemail at 206-333-1537.
Geeknights airs every weeknight, Monday through Thursday.
Geeknights is recorded with absolutely no studio and no audience. But unlike those other talk shows, it's actually recorded at night.